Hi, today I want to talk about doing real science. And this is going to be quite different, but probably not different for what you expect from me. So I'm finishing up my kit book here, and we're going to be talking about a couple of things in it right now. So what I have here is some watermelon seeds, and we're going to read the parable of the sower. So a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some of the seeds fell along the path, and the birds came down and devoured them. So let's go on to the next one. And some of the seeds, number 2, fell on the rocky ground where they did not have much soil. And immediately they sprung up, and since they had no depth of soil, but when the sun rose, they were scorched. And since they had no root, they withered away. Number 3, other seeds fell among the thorns. And the thorns grew up and choked them. And see, before I tell you the 4th one, this soil is really good here. We had cut it down and whatever was growing there, and these weren't even intended. They just grew up. So the soil is really good. So number 4, other seed, they fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. Matthew 13, 3 and 9. So welcome to Renaissance Charge Videos. I'm Rick Friedrich, and we've already gone over the parable of the sower. Let's continue on with it as we go over the idea of doing real science, what that really means. You'll understand more as we go along. This is going to be a continuation of the other video that I just did, where I'm talking about answers to Genesis and that. So look that one up if you haven't seen it already. So here then, the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is the one that was sown along the path. As for what was sown on the rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, yet has no root in himself, but endures for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. That was number 2. As for what was sown among the thorns, this is the one who, when he hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. As for that was sown in good soil, this is the one who hears the word, understands it, and he bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another case 60, and another 30. Matthew 13, 18, 23. Now get this. Then the disciples came to him. This is actually before that last paragraph. Why do you speak to them in parables? And he answers, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For the one who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. This is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. Indeed, in their case, the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled that says, you will indeed hear, but never understand. You will indeed see, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and with their ears they can barely hear, and their eyes they have closed, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and turn, and I will heal them. Blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. For truly, I say to you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, and did not see it, and to hear what you hear, and do not hear it. Matthew 13:10-17. So, in this new book, this kit here, which is basically finished now, I will be explaining those categories in regard to people in their search for alternative energy and their level of interest and success. So where do you fall? This is what we just had a meeting in Texas, and I asked everybody, where do you stand? Where are you in this? Is this really for you? But more importantly is the moral elements of this. So it applies all across the idea of doing science, like any form of scientific endeavor, or really any pursuit in life. Where are you on that path? And it's obviously primarily a moral issue, a moral parable. So let's go over it a little bit. So the seed that's sown on the path is like the people just don't get it. They don't hear it. They're distracted or whatever. There's a lot of things in life that don't interest us. We don't think it's relevant. But a lot of times there is a pearl of great price, a very important thing that comes our way. And if we're not paying attention, we lose it. Or if we follow the multitude into to evil, then we might miss it and misjudge what is good, because often things look the opposite to what they really are. So this, as in science, has everything to do with science, because if you're prejudiced, we're going to talk about these different things in a minute, or whatever, you're going to miss the whole thing. So let's go over the next one, which is a little bit more further along in the sense of a little bit more interested person. On this rocky ground now, they immediately have this joy. Oh wow, great. But then what? They forget. Literally 5 minutes later, like how many people have I talked to where I talked to them about something important, they were all energetic, and then 5 minutes later you find out that they had no real interest in it. It was just being agreeable and whatever. So you got to understand the circumstances that people are in when you're talking to them in life and when you're working with them, to realize that people might give an appearance that's not what you think. So then the biggest one of concern is number 3 here. Those where the seed fell among the thorns. So in other words, it's still good soil except for the thorns in that soil. So it's taking root. It grows up, and like what I was showing, where we had, I believe those are blackberry bushes. I learned this year that you had to let them grow for 2 years before they would come up. But anyway, they grew so fast and so tall, anything in there really didn't make it or didn't thrive. And it was really a huge area, and I thought I was going to get berries and I didn't. So this is a perfect analogy, at least for me. I can tell you about it, which is what I'm doing. So these are very significant. Like when we're talking about in religion and Christianity, the vast majority of people are in those three camps. Like almost everybody is in that camp, especially this third camp, where the world is still in them. They've not really found God. They're trying to. They're going through like mechanically. God, like we're going to talk about this in a bit. God is distant away. We're going to read. Actually, I might as well say it here. So we're talking about Answers to Genesis, and I'm kind of critiquing their one paper right now in the last video. But what was interesting was, here's a man who's very interesting, Jason Leslie. I do like his teaching and presentations. Anyway, what he said was logically, what does he say here? I've kind of lost the page number. That he has to have logic. He says here, the place of reason. He says a lot of good things in here. But then, this is what I'm talking about in this third category. He says, in fact, I could not know that I'm saved apart from using reason. After all, the Bible nowhere says Dr. Leslie is saved. Instead, it tells me that if you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. I have genuinely acknowledged that Jesus is Lord, and I believe that God raised him from the dead. Therefore, I'm saved. I must use logical reasoning to draw this conclusion. Now, it really depends on what he's meaning by knowing he's saved. In my upbringing in the Baptist churches, which I don't believe the ones that I was at was real Christian, but they counted on the outward form of things to be real religion. So go through the motions, never really arrive at what you should be or you know you ought to be, but you just say the words and therefore you've got a ticket to heaven type of thing. So I'm not sure if that's exactly his meaning. I hope not. But the idea is that essentially they're looking for a proposition, religion, basically a hope that I'll get there. Right now, I'm living amongst Amish, and the Amish people are typically like that too. Hopefully, I'll get to heaven, do good works, be well-meaning, but where is the inward revelation of God to the soul? And so that's missing in this third category of people, that it is sown amongst the thorns, because basically it's a divided heart. It's not totally consecrated. And the same applies to science, so hear me out here, because if you're not really immersed in the subject and given to it and distracted, you're not going to be in a place to really do like deep research and come to proper conclusions. And I talk about it here, which we'll get into in a minute, the deeper elements of life and doing science. It's not merely going after some mechanical external result. What are you doing with this pursuit? Are you being led by God, ultimately, is the big question. And that's not part of science, we're told. So I want to kind of bust that myth and come out and say something maybe completely different than anybody else is saying. And it's just really important for me. And at this time of my life, I finally come into a place after 35 years of the place where I needed to be with God. And so I want to talk about it. And I talked about it at this meeting that we just had last week. So, in other words, if we're looking to have an affirmation that we're going to heaven or accepted by God without anything internally happening to us. I'm not talking about feelings here. I'm talking about much more than that. So then we're still in one of these three categories. You can have joy, you can have like momentarily, but where is really your heart? Now there's a lot of parables that Jesus gives about having, the pearl of great price. And the most difficult one for people is when Jesus says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no part with me. Now this gets really deep, and people have no idea what that means until they have this experience with God. Now, people want to call that kind of like a nirvana experience, and I guess you could say that in a Christian perspective. But the main problem is with like number 3 here, this category is that you're still distracted, you're still in the world. The world has sway on you, and you need to die to it and let go. And you need to be, as Jesus said to Nicodemus, Nicodemus in chapter 3 of John, that what is born of the flesh is the flesh, and what's born of the spirit is the spirit. And that's what I'm getting to right now, is you are either born of God or you're still in the world. Our citizenship is to be in heaven. We are in this world, but not of this world. And when we come to a place with God where He has called us and drawn us to Himself, I should say, then we have new life, and it's from above and it's from within, and it's something indescribable that you never had before, and it's like more than a blind man seeing for the first time. So what we find is all sorts of passages in the Bible, like Romans chapter 7 and different places where people are struggling. They're struggling to obey, to do the truth, and it comes hard. And it's a battle against this flesh. So there's two ways of looking at that. Either you can be in a state where you're still defeated, or you can be in that chapter 6 of Romans and chapter 8 of Romans where you're free. So you're either a slave. I remember giving my brother a sermon from Charles Finney, putting out his door of his room, and then he first got convicted there. It was called License, Bondage, Liberty. You're in a state of either free to do whatever you want, no conscience at all. It's a license to sin, do whatever you want. or you're in the state of bondage where you just are trying but not succeeding, and you haven't really given all, you haven't really believed. And the way my illustration of faith is, for years has been, so say you're a little 4-year-old child and you're upstairs in a room and the house is burning down and you can't go out your door and there's a window. And outside that window, your window is open, but there's a really steep peak, and you know if you go on that, you're going to fall and die. And this hand comes in there, this adult firefighter representing Jesus, if you will, offers you this chance to get out. And you take that hand and you hold it. You hold it for your life. Everything is dependent upon that. And you get across to safety, but you wouldn't have. You would have perished if you tried yourself. And that's where we are, moment by moment. And that's what represents the fourth, when the fourth person, the good soil, they receive that seed of God, that life of Him into their heart, and they become entirely new, totally new. and so sower. So that's what I want to get into, making the distinctions, both scientifically, because really everything is science, the science of the heart, if you will. And I don't want to make these kind of distinctions where this is religion and this is science. There is to be no difference. Everything that we do is this. This is what I'm ultimately getting at. And this is what is the cover of this book is about. From Him and through Him and to Him are all things. And so I'll show you the diagram here. I'm not going to go through this whole book, obviously. It's for those who have purchased it, but I want to talk about the spiritual things. I'm never going to charge for spiritual things. So this is the fuller diagram. This came to me about a year ago. The arrows from Him and then through Him and to Him are all things. This is the world, all things. To Him be the glory forever and ever. This is at the very end of the whole long argument of Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 11. He ends with this. 11. Trying to get mixed up in my chapters there. So what I'm getting at is we want that to be the case. Everything. And how could I be thinking about God all day long while I'm working and whatever? Well, it's a whole different life. And I'm not talking about being a monk where you're verbalizing something all the day long if you have to. But I'm talking about walking with God, right? Walking with God and Him enlightening your path and filling you with His presence. That's what life's about. And well, I'll get into it because I don't want to get ahead of myself. So we're going to bounce around here between the science and what have you. So one of the things is I'm going to talk about the quest for limitless energy and endless life. Isaiah 55:1. Oh. Come, everyone who is thirsty, to the waters, and you without money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Why do you spend money on what is not food and your wages on what does not satisfy? Think about it. What's the point? What are you doing? You know, I'm over 50 now, and you know, as I was approaching 50, I really felt frustrated that I hadn't done so much in my life. What did I accomplish really compared to what I know that I could have done? And so the years were passing by so fast, and the regrets were there and all that. And so the Lord was bringing me through a place, and as I say in this book, I really couldn't finish this book until I came to the right place to be able to teach on this point and what I'm doing today. Because I was ultimately holding out, or whatever, distracted, whatever you can say. And so, yeah, what is the point? You know, what are we doing here? Right? What good are we doing? Does it really make a difference? Like, I look at some of the stuff that I've been doing, various ministry, and what lasting effect has it been on anyone? Right? It's hard to really judge that. But if you're trying to do things in and of yourself, that's what you get. That's the feelings you result in and experiencing, because you just are doing it in and of yourself. But when you're working with God, when He's leading you, you have confidence in everything, and you can trust Him to provide and make your fruit last and be useful. Because, I mean, what else do you really want to be than useful? Do you really want to consume this gift upon yourself? Do you want it to be outside of that whole circle there? That you're not acknowledging, receiving from Him, or doing things for Him, or having Him work through you? So this is the big point. Is He working through you? Now, another teaching is the whole potter and clay teaching, where the Lord will make use of everyone in some way or another, whether a pot for honor or dishonor. But that's what you don't want to be, is the dishonor. You want to be fruit that lasts eternally. So what is the root for the quest of endless free energy? If we really stop and think about it, what we all want is to have all our needs taken care of. We want to not only always be always provided for, but also to be happy and satisfied in life. We may reason that if we have a means of producing energy freely, we can convert that to money and buy everything we want to accomplish that. And those of you who are watching who don't believe in non-conventional free energy, that's fine. You can apply all this to solar panels. And what I say too in this book is that a solar panel is free energy, over unity, self-running, perpetual motion. So let's put that down into consideration there. So hear me out on this then. So then the question is, so Isaiah proclaims in the above quote that everyone is invited to much more than limitless energy in this world. The question is asked, why do people spend their energy and wages on things for a life that does not satisfy? The richest people in the world are not happy or ever satisfied. Even though they spend their money on what they want, is never fulfilling their fundamental needs. Do not think it would be any different for you if you had that kind of money. The fact is that while you were made to have all your needs met in this life, you are not meant to have all your wants or desires gratified. unless they be completely in sync with the one who made you. Get this. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. How wonderful when the desires of your heart aren't just self-destruction, destroying you like we see in this world today, and that your heart is in sync with God, and so your delight is in him, and then he blesses you with the desire of your heart. That's what we need to have. So just as the ability to harvest limitless energy has been a hidden mystery for ages, so that the vast majority, so was the vast more important opportunity, or rather calling, into a glorious life that inherits all things, was seemingly a mystery for ages. The masses have always doubted that these kinds of things are fiction or dreams. But deep down we know we are made to experience more than what we have grown up seeing around us. Something fundamental is lacking, and many end up pursuing some kind of limitless venture or thing to answer that calling, right? I did. I jumped around and did this and that and get distracted, and it's always like some people, they think it's just about there. They're almost arrived. And anyway, so that's where people are at a lot of times. So no doubt some of you are doing just that in this research or in other ways. Ironically, we limit our quest for fulfilling that limitless void with pursuits of that which do not even come close to what we were made to inherit. It's absurd. For there is something beyond our ability to fathom that awaits us if we but turn away from all that does not truly satisfy and sell everything we have for that pearl of great price. It is death. Unless the seed dies and goes into that earth, it shall not blossom to a plant. So we all know this language. Oh yeah, you have to die before, but really, you have to. There's no climbing over the wall into paradise. And paradise is here on earth, even in the midst of darkness, right? And that's the thing. There's something totally different than the externals. And the externals, though gloomy, can be still wonderful in Eden for us when we're walking with him, when he's filling us. So I guess I'm going to jump into some distraction here a little bit, because I wanted to mention this at some part in this video. So there was a video by, was it Chris Adams? It looked pretty interesting in some of his other videos on YouTube. And this one was on tongues, on speaking in tongues, right? And so I loved what he said at the beginning. It was great. And then he moved into a misunderstanding of history and talked about the modern sense of speaking in tongues, in which is quite a big part of my research, at least prior to that time period in 1901. So without getting into too many details, what happened was I responded to that. I haven't heard back from him, but I responded to some of the fallacies he was making, and then I tried to say what you're looking for, what you're expecting in this, thing that's happened over the last 125 years, 24 years, with people speaking in this tongues, as they think it's called, is something entirely different from the true Pentecostal holiness experience of the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And so prior to that, for 170 years, we saw real manifestations, not of speaking in this, whatever you want to call it, unintelligible language or thing that's not even that. But what we saw was people experiencing the baptism of God's Spirit and being filled with Him. And then experiencing what Jesus says, rivers of living water in your heart, overflowing. This is not regular joy. I'm talking about something totally different. And with a corresponding holy life that they never had before. And so you had this holiness movement come about. First you had like John Wesley and Charles Wesley and the First Great Awakening, which is a big part of my research in my life. I've studied that and published books on that. And this changed all of society. Like in England, like half of the people were drunks and there was so much alcohol and suddenly this movement of God came in and changed everything. There's nothing else in history that can compare to that prior, besides in the New Testament time period, where we had these great revivals too. So then you had this kind of coming and going in the Methodist churches and what have you at the time. Great changes that took place in society. And then that kind of waned a bit, and then you had the appearance of Charles Finney, who's another guy that I published. And this whole thing revived again. And it was even greater than that other experience. The Second Great Awakening happened. And so you had a real form of Christianity, unlike what we see today for the most part, which is not, it's not real today. It's only partial, and it's contradictory and abhorrent to everybody. And it's just full of sin. There's no victory. And so the point is, today we don't believe in the Bible anymore, even though people say they do. They don't really believe it, because they're not experiencing it. So back in that day, like 1830s to like 1880s, you had huge changes to the whole culture. So many things that we don't realize where they came from that time period. And so that was a wonderful time in American history. And it's one of the reasons why I came to this country in all my research. So what I'm saying is, society changed, and it led to the end of slavery. That was one of the fruits, both in England 100 years earlier, and then in America later. And then there's so many great things that happened in this country as a result of that. And so at the tail end of that period of time, you had like 1900, and leading into the world wars and all that, where you had the total reversal of all that, and it's all forgotten now. And there's only a few people like me that will write on the subject and bring up the details. And so what happened was, during before those time periods, you had like crime was stopping, like in New York, all the way to New York City, across New York, you had all these incredible things happening, and people were really truly converted. It was like Pentecost, and what resulted in the early church. So, this applies to people. If you're not a Christian, don't think that this doesn't apply to you, because this is what everybody's been seeking. And through the ages, everybody's been trying to perfect society and some form of government or some kind of philosophy, and it's going through the motions. It's still in number 3 category, where you're with the thorns. It's not working because it's missing the point. And the point is being in that pearl of great price, in God himself. We're meant to walk with him. So I'm going to go over more now in depth. So again, the tongues thing. So what happened was, getting back to that video, I wrote, and then I saw another comment. I wrote to another guy who was more like Baptist type, and I said, well, I accept what this Christ guy had said in this video at the beginning, but I reject the other parts, because he didn't really do his research to find out about those people back then were not, like, as their own reporting showed, was different than what others reported of them. In other words, they didn't have the same kind of fruit that we saw for the 170 years before that in Christian circles. What it did is it destroys people's faith. It made it external again into some form of things, some outward expression. And so what I was trying to do between the two different people was say, look, I accept that there is something that changes internally, but to the other one I said, it's not merely about trying to follow this Bible, right? That's not what it's about in the sense of externally. And Jesus even said that you look to the scriptures as if that's your salvation, but it's not. They speak of me. And what Jesus is to us is God. In other words, all of his offices and relations to us are literally experienced in our heart. I mean, I can't even explain it, but like, feel it. And so that he shows us as himself as God, not merely deducing it logically by reading passages that tell you such, but it's actually revealed to you, where you can actually eat his flesh and drink his blood. That is, that you take him in to your very inward being, and he fellowships with you. He's inside of you, and you literally have fellowship with the Father and with the Son and the Holy Spirit. Can't explain it. And I don't know what to say. It might sound really crazy or mystical. But what I'm saying is, it's offensive to hear that when Jesus said that. And when he said that, especially about drinking of the blood and eating the flesh, people went away. They were like, I can't take this. I don't understand it. Whatever. This is way weird. But it was a spiritual, like, obviously there's analogies, but it was a spiritual experience that goes on. And it's not merely, like, so what I was trying to say to this guy in the video, the one who was like saying it's just merely propositions, like words that our religion is, and we're trying to conform outwardly to this set of laws and, duties, which is, that's, not in the spirit, it's of the flesh still. I was trying to say is like, well, what are you saying? Like, we're supposed to be praying, and God is supposed to be hearing us, at least. And are you saying that there's no relationship with God? He says, my sheep hear my voice. They follow me. They are led. Right? And we walk with God. Well, what does that mean? Merely I just speak some words to him and I don't get a response? Or is he really leading us? So this is where we are to be this way all day long with him. Not like in times of, obviously you have more time to concentrated prayer and all that, but I'm talking about when we're doing science. I'm talking about when we're driving, when we're eating, we're drinking, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink, whatever you do all to the glory of God. in the fellowship of the Spirit. So the Spirit of God takes the things of Christ and shows them to us internally, that we have victory over the sins and we have more than conqueror experience. Then when we were so weak, then we could be made strong. We're not strong in and of ourselves. We're pathetic. We're nothing. Doesn't matter how strong physically we are. But in Him we can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Now all these promises are yes in Christ Jesus, which is a verse again. So I'm going to bring over another one here. So get this. So the belief and experience of non-conventional free energy generation is rare and controversial. Having all of our fundamental needs met is also equally controversial with the world's system. Implied in that is another subcategory that is just as rare and controversial. The Apostle Peter gave us the following words, his final words, 2,000 years ago around this time, which should give us even more excitement. His divine power has given us everything, all things that pertain to life and godliness. Again, through our knowledge of Him, and this is not head knowledge merely, it's entire experiential knowledge, gnosis, of Him who calls us to His own glory and excellence, by which He has granted to us His precious and very great promises, so that through them you may become that you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped from the corruption that is in the world because of sinful desire. 2 Peter 1, 3, and 4. So that is what nobody's saying today. They don't believe it because they can't even understand how that could be possible. They don't know what it means to have the divine nature inside of them, or saturating them, or whatever you want to call it. Because we're supposed to be the temple of God. The temple of God, God inhabited the temple. Like I've said this before, and I'll say it again. People often ask me about health questions, and I do want to talk about that a little bit later. Some new books that I found. So let me just get it before I forget. So people will ask me, what do I do? Oh, I'm a mess, I'm dying, or whatever, right? I say, well, the first thing you do, go and study the Old Testament temple and tabernacle. Everything. And come back to me. And when some really get the point, they go into the New Testament and realize, oh, we are to be the temple. And suddenly it becomes a moral issue with them that, oh, I should be taking care of my body, not just to not be sick, but to glorify God in my body. But God is meant to dwell in us like the temple and fill us with His glory. Shine through us. So this is a promise of God, not just a commandment. It's a promise that He will be able to give us everything. He gives us everything pertaining to life and godliness. So it's not merely Him providing for our spiritual needs, but for our physical needs, everything in life, right? So God has already provided everything. This whole transhumanism, which is I'm in stark contrast with in everything I'm saying here today, which is more and more of a focus that I'll get into here, is that the transhumanism today says that we are not sufficient in ourselves. We need more. We need more from man. God's in a distance. We'll get into that in a moment. That's what they believe. But God has actually promised to walk with us and be in us and give us everything. And right there, that's the promise. So this is a promise from God with no limitation. Everything is provided for life and also our moral needs. We are provided for just as the birds are. And I was just saying that to my mother, who's got a whole bird sanctuary in her backyard, and I was looking at this hummingbird today, and I get all these birds around here now, in that outside that I showed, those beautiful flowers, and those birds are provided for. I watch them. They don't have any thought for tomorrow, and they're always taken care of. And so you learn a lot from the birds in that context. So we can trust him to give us what we need to have the life worth living, which is what Socrates said. We are also given the opportunity to become the children of God. Now that's indescribable what that means. Where we can be saved from our sins and the corrupt desires in this world. In this world, it says. People are waiting for heaven. But we're supposed to be praying, may your kingdom come, and your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. May your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So you can have that. And of course, the more people that are filled with God's presence, the more this world is going to turn around. That is the only solution, people. It's not in some technology or some philosophy or whatever, trying harder. It's about getting in tune with your Creator. So the latter is highly controversial and almost universally rejected as impossible, in the same way as these free energy systems are considered wishful thinking. It all comes down to who is an actual authority in these matters, and the actual facts of the matter in the real world. Before we look carefully into this method and way that of that perfect pearl, let us first turn to the possibility of what we're using as analogy here. So I'm going to talk about here now the nature and possibility of free energy and over unity. And so the perspective or worldview of the modern spirit of the world is that of loss and self-destruction, right? Which blinds people from receiving the abundant grace that is continually poured out by the Creator and Sustainer of all things. When assuming man is the measure of all things, people strive to control and possess what they can, right? As they can for the few vain moments of their vain, futile existence. Without true confidence in and guidance by the Creator of all things, people naturally corrupt themselves into a state of self-destruction. You see it everywhere. You've done it to yourself, you know. This spiritual loss has now led to the accelerated destruction of the physical world over the last 150 years. Whatever, you can go back to whatever years. While people assume that modern science is progressing in truth and the betterment of mankind, the fact is all the science have been fundamentally corrupted with the resulting effect of the self-destruction of mankind. Now in this other video I'm talking about today that I'm doing, I'm talking about how the one branch of science, the creationists will say the one branch of science has been corrupted. You know, the origins and what have you. And they're very limited on what other things they'll say. But I'm saying after all these years and all these different sciences, working in industry, I can't think of any of the sciences that are corrupted. Because they're not being led by God. And I was looking at the statistics today of how many scientists believe in God, and only like 41% in some kind of God. And so that's a lot less than the general population. So something's vastly wrong with scientific procedure and methodology. So I'm going to go into some interesting point that I just found, and this is on a creation website, which is very valuable to everybody if you listen carefully here. So before mentioning the historical progression of the so-called scientific community rejecting free energy, it is important to look at alarming admissions published this month, which was last month, from the scientific community showing that the system is broken and cannot be trusted. So and I'm going to repeat this again in the other video. The entities enabling scientific fraud, so this is the title actually, the entities enabling scientific fraud at scale are large, resilient, and growing rapidly. And this is from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, August 4th, 2025, by Reese A. K. Richardson, Spencer S. Haught, Jennifer Bine, Thomas Stoger, Louis Nuns, Emerald, whatever. So this is, you can see you can look that up, that title. I'll probably put a link to it maybe in this. So the abstract, it says, science is characterized by collaboration and cooperation, but also by uncertainty, competition, and inequality. While there has always been some concern that these pressures may compel some defect from the scientific research ethos, i.e., fail to make genuine contributions to the production of knowledge or the training of an expert workforce, the focus has largely been on the actions of lone individuals. Recently, however, reports of coordinated scientific fraud activities have increased. Some suggest that the ease of communication provided by the internet and open access publishing have created the conditions for the emergence of entities, paper mills, i.e. sellers of mass-produced low-quality and fabricated research, brokers, i.e. conduits between producers and publishers of fraudulent research, predatory journals who do not conduct any quality controls on submissions that facilitate systematic scientific fraud. Huge statement. Huge statement. I mean, you might, if you're not familiar with these organizations, that you might not get how significant that is. Significance. Numerous recent scientific and journalistic investigations demonstrate that systematic scientific fraud is a growing threat to the scientific enterprise. In large measure, this has been attributed to organizations known as research paper mill. We uncover footprints of activities connected to scientific fraud that extend beyond the production of fake papers to brokerage roles in a widespread network of editors and authors who cooperate to achieve the publication of scientific papers that escape traditional peer review standards. Our analysis reveals insights into how such organizations are structured and how they operate. End of quote. So this is huge. This is what I've been saying all along, and it's actually not new. In the fundamental sense, this has been going on for centuries. But mostly from around the 1880s onward, you really see this pick up and the control of knowledge and what is believed to run the whole. Like it used to be that people were free to believe differently, and then they consolidated everybody. So that all bred this whole thing, because now it's just gone rampant. You know, this whole thing has just gone beyond their control. So you have the situation. I think I might mention this. The car manufacturers today, they're making garbage cars that deliberately fail. That's part of this. It's part of industry. The quality of parts are going down. The workforce isn't there, like there in their head or their heart. They're on their social media, they're whatever. So what we have is just chaos. It's not reliable. Nothing is reliable anymore. And so I'm trying to say exactly the opposite of all that in this video. This is what I'm saying. The answer is the Creator Himself. There's no fixing this, because you're not fixing the problem, whatever you try and do, other than being one with your Creator. And while we're promoting something else, we're just lying to ourselves. And I have the facts on my side, people. I've done my life's work was in those times period, in those revivals, where the world was turned upside down, and of course in the early church too. It, like, there's no doubt about it. So what are we trying to do here? You know, the philosophy isn't working, and I know what it does. I know what does work. So it was further stressed that it's important to explicitly highlight the risk posed by large-scale fraudulent science to emerging cutting-edge approaches by machine scientists like AI, which such approaches are not yet able to distinguish quality science from poor quality or fraudulent science. And this task only becomes more difficult as the number of fraudulent scientific publications increases. So, however, end of quote. However, a careful survey of the history of modern Western science reveals that this departure from objectivity is compromised by fraud is not new to the year 2025. Presently, the headlines are filled with stories showing that the whole medical community was compromised already 5 years ago with the push for nothing else but fear and vaccines, right? And you all heard me. If you were listening to back then, you can go back and watch my videos. I was saying the exact same thing that's on the headlines. So with a long host of abuses to mankind, as well with that, was part of my sentence there, that were extremely dangerous to everyone. Yet, the basis for vaccines itself is also founded upon fraudulent science, going back over 100 years ago to the mythical idea of fear of non-existent viruses. Now this, I'm quoting in this book from the Baileys. Somehow I missed them. Actually, they came along just after I was doing my research. They changed they're two doctors. They were married, Mark and Samantha Bailey, in New Zealand. And so then, this is what they quote here. This is actually an introduction from the forward, Tim Noakes. It has been revealed through historical analysis of Louis Pasteur's private laboratory notebooks that he did indeed present misleading information regarding his scientific discoveries, particularly concerning his work on vaccines. In addition to that fact, okay, so now that was actually a quote from AI. I did get that quote from the AI, but I was just short on time to dig up all the details, and I didn't really want to get off onto that subject too much. Just to bring it up as a point here. So in addition to the fact, this is my saying this now, that Pasteur could not actually prove contagion, like the things were contagious, the claim that Koch's postulates somehow link disease to microorganisms is found to be inadequate, while the proof for the existence of viruses was and has become circular, documented in the new publication by New Zealand doctors Mark Bailey and Samantha Bailey, The Final Pandemic, 2024. So, this is a circular argument. The biological sample, number one, the biological sample from the patient contains a life-threatening virus. Otherwise, why would the patient be suffering from this illness? 2. When mixed with a biological portion containing African green monkey kidney cells, fetal bovine serum, antibiotics, and antimicrotics, this mixture can cause the appearance of cytopathic effects, CPEs, in the monkey's cells, indicating impending cell death. Probably what you expect, right? Number 3, the appearance of these CPEs in the monkey cells proves that, number 1, the biological sample from the patient contains life-threatening virus. So it is a complete circle. Figure 1, the gold standard test used by virologists to detect the presence of a virus in a biological sample is based on a circular logic that is infinitely self-fulfilling. In addition, this experimental proof of viral presence is not scientifically valid. and it lacks an essential control experiment in which the effects of the proposed virus is tested alone without any added material derived from the patient's sample. This control is essential to prove that CPEs develop only in the presence of a protected virus. So, I haven't even started reading this book very much, so I'm looking forward to it. Now, I went over that a little fast there, and that'll be more for another day. But obviously this stuff is all in the news now. Not that they're trying to speak against viruses, but against the vaccines is what the news is about. But the point is, when you go back to that fountainhead of Pasteur, he faked his lab notes, and now it's come out. Well, about in the 1970s, I believe that came out, but you really didn't hear about it too much when you were taught in school. So anyway, the idea though is that, briefly speaking, there isn't viruses; they don't exist, but there is the terrain theory is the true theory. And this is a book that they also publish that I just came across and ordered. And it looks exactly like I was hoping. I never knew this book existed. And it goes back to 1949, its final edition. Check it out, Dr. Earl Williams from New Zealand as well. Terrain Theory, How to Achieve Perfect Health Through Diet, Living Habits, and Divine Thinking. Oh, it's completely consistent with this book, or this video. So I'm so excited. But anyway, the idea was that viruses are mistaken for like the exosomes. The exosomes are the body's kind of elimination communication system, in which when there's a foreign toxin in your body, it will be activated by the cells to then try and dispose of it, and then also warn the rest of the body to fight against this and clear it out. So that's why when you ingest something, like if I go into something that's toxic, immediately my nose starts running and my body starts flushing, because I'm really more careful now about how I eat and everything. And so my body's been, cleansing out. And so what happens is, the reason why the 6 feet thing was still at play is because your body is sending all these signals out. And so it's God's mercy that He created this whole, or His grace that He gave us this system that protects us. And then even those in our close proximity, it will then kind of go to them as well. So you ever notice when you get sick, somebody gets sick initially, the other person, like a spouse, gets sick, but they only get sick for maybe a couple of days. Whereas the other one who got contaminated, which is really some kind of toxin, maybe plus malnutrition or whatever else, bad environment, bad terrain, they still have it in them, the body's still trying to get rid of it, so they last longer. But the other person then gets signaled to go through these, what we call illnesses, but they're really flushing out of the body, which then we try to suppress, and then we get it worse. And so that's another whole subject, but it applies here because it's a fundamental misunderstanding of science. The modern medical world is completely wrong. And this was a medical doctor too, and he gave up on all that and had really good success in doing that. So what I'm saying, all the sciences are corrupted from what they originally were, right? And now we have all these experiences, and they're misery, and they're profit, for profit, right? So we can have abundant health, we can have abundant energy, we can have all of our needs met in this world. And I'm not saying we need to be rich to be having all of our needs met. We have to be rich in that God provides for us for everything that we need to do His will. His wonderful will. That is a delight. So again, I want to, like, this is important because I'm trying to get the student here in this book to grasp the idea of a control. So I want to give some experiments or anecdotes and different analogies where the whole science has been thrown off, right? Where we go in the wrong direction fundamentally. It becomes a racket, right? Now people are like wanting free energy and they're like, well, we should have that. And it is available for you. But you're going to have to unlearn some things. And that is your prejudice. And you have to develop the idea of a control. So this book gets into it. This kit is going to be going into what we did with the SG kit and all that. And going into like evaluating batteries with the proper control. And then we learn from there, we build on that. So it's essential to have a sufficient control in scientific experimentation, as we will continue to stress. In this subject, there has never been a sufficient control or even a sample of a virus to support, blah, blah, blah. So, okay, let's see, let's just finish that then. So could it be that pushing virus fears and a culture of giving people poison to combat diseases are largely caused by poison in the body? Is actually a deadly global racket, as I said earlier? This subject is perfectly analogous to hindering energy independence, as it is destroying faith in God's creation, where we can trust in the sufficiency of the body to keep itself healthy while we obey natural law and prevent self-destruction. Free health, free energy, independent of monopolies. Around 1880s, the sciences became increasingly controlled by profit-based interests who naturally began to control the schools and policies and governments, including religious organizations and institutions. No surprise to you, right? During that time, we started to see the loss of freedom of investigation as people were expected to submit to new profits under the profit scheme, two different words, set up by the authorities, by the institutions that were being considered the source of all truth. While individual authorities were raised up as a symbol to bow to, they could be replaced by others if necessary. More influential than the individuals were the laws that were created that became infallible dogma. The laws of science by men who now thought themselves to be the measure of all things essentially became a new religious creed that all must believe in more than in and opposed to all declarations and revelations coming from God Himself. Naturally, this profit-based godless religion, seducing the Western world and forcing itself upon everyone worldwide, insisted most vigorously in making it one of the most well-known and repeated laws of pseudophysics, the idea that energy cannot be created. Whoa. That's a long sentence, and it's quite controversial. What are you saying, Rick? That energy can actually be created? Yeah. While the idea of not being able to create energy is vague and uncertain in what that actually means specifically by people, it is the application and the presumptuous claim that becomes false and anti-scientific. However, I take issue with the claim itself. Who on earth could make such a claim? On what basis? Who can justify or prove such a claim? There is no way to prove that energy cannot be created. How can you prove it? It's a mere assumption and pointless to make. God himself created all things and has the ability to create anything at any time. Right? Isn't that true? Indeed, he creates life again and again and performs miracles even through his people. Is a miracle not like some kind of creation of sorts that goes against the regular order that you're normally used to? Now, what are we interested in? Now, what we are interested in and focused on in this chapter relates to the application of this false doctrine of corrupted science and the ability to trigger processes that generate electricity freely or without having to put forth personal effort or cost in the way that is normally done. So I'm saying it's the context. So we got to have a idea of control rooted in our science, people, and in our evaluation of all truth, right? Of all things to determine what truth is. But context is the next point. The application, what are people really talking about? What context? It's very critical. It's absolutely critical, without which you're just willy-nilly. Talking to a guy right now, and part of this relates to him. He might be watching, so I better be careful what I say. Hi, my friend. And as far as I'm understanding him, his like way off in his philosophy is not, it doesn't have any real solid context. It's kind of floating and reality is not existing, and we're in a simulation and all this stuff. And so there's no context at all. You're just in a state of flux in your mind. You can't tell what's real and what's not, and that's a miserable place to be in. When you don't have the anchor of your soul. So, but what we're talking about in this book, which I'm not going to get too much into, because that's going to take too long, and we really want to get to the main points here. So, what I was trying to get at is that these laws are really in a specific context, like a closed system, but there is no such thing as a closed system that I've ever experienced or am aware of. We're in an open system. So all those kind of arguments, as I've said many times, don't apply because we are in an open system. Now you could have a self-defeating system which is essentially closed, but still has some openness to it. So there's really no so I get into that in more detail in this book here. And I talked about, solar, what I said earlier. So I get a deficiency, and then I show you some actual perpetual motion. And I'm not going to get into that because that's part of the kit. The second law of thermodynamics, of course. So the first, second laws are presumptuous, and they are general but not universal, and so there's no way to prove them to be universal. All right, so the main point of this whole thing, which I've already been touching on, and then we will be done here. Essential methodological foundation and context for this and all scientific research and procedure. All right? And please send my way if you found people saying this sort of thing before, that you need to be walking with God and led by God to do science at all. Over the last 20 years of dealing with experimenters, engineers, industrialists, and scientists, having success and making mistakes and teaching students how to succeed in their designing, building, evaluating, and troubleshooting, I have determined the core problems in scientific analysis and procedure. Not on my own, by so many good examples and bad ones too, and also studying history and finding like the books that I published, the old ones. So and again, I'll direct people to Ace in the Hand, and go on my truthinheart.com website and look Ace in the Hand up and look at his philosophy books. They're unlike anything you will have ever read, and I'm still working through them. But there's many other books too that I can recommend. I don't have time to here. So this actually relates to all learning and rational activity on all subjects and pursuits in life. So not just science, because really life is all science in one sense. So it's essential to have not only a proper habits and goals, but to have certain character and a right methodology, or else you will experience failure. While one can have some limited form of success in achieving immediate goals, they can also fundamentally fail in the larger context of the subject matter, such as misunderstanding the results, the application, or the benefits, or more importantly, being out of sync with your Creator and what is best for the well-being of this world. So that's a big thing for me. You got to understand, I have to evaluate what I contribute to this world, that it doesn't create some kind of Tesla nightmare, right? Because Tesla did thrust upon us a lot of bad technology that people were not ready for. And again, technology is good and bad depending on the context, no doubt. But this whole nanotechnology and the transhumanism and all this stuff is really bad. And it's not doing any good for anybody. I mean, like I said, in the ultimate sense. So we need to have the guidance of our Creator. We need to have the direction. We need to have Him lead us. And we're stupid and we're foolish if we're trying to do it all by ourselves. And I know, as a Christian for 35 years, I kind of bounced around and had all sorts of life failures and let all sorts of people down. And I'm sorry for that, and I should have got to the point right at the beginning. But, whatever. We have to move on. So let's look at the core problems, explore the solutions, so that you can succeed in all things. We have the promise of God already mentioned, that He has given us everything we need for life and godliness. So let's be diligent. The prejudice menace. As prejudice has been a critical enemy, I've battled my whole life against it and been preaching against it. It has been a frequent point of teaching in this research. And I had to realize, after trying to talk to people so many years, I have to tell them what not to do. And that's the problem that... hold on a second here. Just want to make sure it's still recording. I have to fight against this prejudice, prejudgment, on the good side and the bad side. In other words, over-believing what you want it to be, or what you're prejudiced against. So every sin a person commits seems to also include an instance of making oneself prejudiced. What is it? We are not talking about cultural prejudice like racism, but intellectual prejudgment. It involves a decision to believe something before one ought to. There are many motives or desires to want things to be various ways, and we can convince ourselves of such when we ought not to do that. We can make mistakes and then fall into prejudice, like becoming convinced that there are only two alternative choices to make as to what reality is in a matter, when often there's a third alternative which is true, and the other two are false. So we have a false dichotomy. We have already addressed an example of the commitment of many people to believe in an idea that is called a law of science, which is assumed to be a universal but cannot be proven to be so. That is, that energy cannot be created. It is assumed that this is true because people think that everything they have observed shows that. Therefore, it must be universal. To me, you could make a general, but a universal is harder to make. To me, this is like a young child growing up in an all white or black culture and thinking that all people are of that one color. This is largely accidental and not a moral evil, that case. At what point does one sin with the formation of their judgment in a specific decision? That would take some time to go over, and we don't have the space here. See our intellectual philosophy books, as I mentioned. However, I will venture to say that most people are in a continual state of prejudgment and have never even begun to realize how unjust they are. This is what I've spent years counseling with people, and ultimately people are in a state of sin, whether they admit it or not. They know they are, but they don't realize how prejudiced they are. And so that's the first thing, overcoming. If you are not prejudiced, you're going to be embracing the truth always. And you're not going to be deviant about it. You're not going to be neglectful. So you're either in the light, in the truth, with God, or you're in death and sin and prejudgment and confirmation bias and all the other fallacies, more or less. So it's one or the other, people. It's not trying to be less. It doesn't work. You're either altogether, you've died to yourself and to this world, and you're in his hands. You're holding his hand. He's pulling you across that roof so you don't fall. And that's it. And it's perfect. It's perfect love. Perfect love. It's not imperfect love. We are to be pure just as he is pure, it says in 1 John. So, take it or leave it. So this is the judgment, he says in John chapter 3, Jesus. This is the judgment, that light has come into the world, and people love the darkness rather than the light, because their works were bad. People like to translate that evil, just bad. For everyone who does bad things hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his work should be exposed. He'd be naked and shown bare, which one day that will be the case for everybody, shown what you really are, no matter how hard you cover it in this world. For everyone who does bad things hates the light, does not come to the light. But whoever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God. That is that. Right there. All things through him. So, there's no pride in that. It's more of a embracing than some kind of prideful thing. You're resting in God, and then he works through you. It's as simple as that. There's nothing more to life than living in God and him providing for you and you being his hands and his feet. What a wonderful experience. In present times, it is so bad that many laugh about their prejudice, while it's also become cool to be bad. So it's like reversed. Everything is bad. Is like bad. Everything is reversed in that sense. And people laugh about their prejudice. Oh yeah, I should, whatever. Ha ha ha. So a major contributing cause beyond the example of most others around them is that the schools directly and indirectly teach students to prejudge many things. I remember 20 years ago being put on the spot to address 2,000 students in the open square on a major Texas university. And then I asked them about logic and when they learned, and they had just learned. And so I said to them, like, how could you go through all these years and not learn how to think? What do you think about that, right? Like, they all studied the logic of numbers and words, but they were never told how to think. They were never taught how to think, not told. You can't be told, you have to be taught. You have to be led and cultured. But they are cultured to become prejudiced, while becoming fools and comfortable with opinionizing, believing what they want to rather than what they should believe, and also not being shown how to suspend judgment. Like, I may talk about things that people might think I'm a conspiracy theorist, but I'm not. I'm the opposite. conspiracy theorists dive into and revel in their learning about conspiracies, I say suspend your judgment. You don't have the ability to evaluate whether this is real or not and what's being presented. So only believe what you ought to believe under the circumstances. And don't feel like you have to learn. Why do you have to have an opinion about everything that happens in the so-called world? How do you know? It's only as good as the testimony, but the testimony is bought and paid for a long time ago. So this includes not being taught by the laws of evidence. They're not taught the laws of evidence. So they are lost to know when science amounts to proof, or evidence amounts to proof. Do you know the difference between proof and evidence? The general population has very little education in these matters, so that when the jury is assembled, they need to be taught such things so as to prevent an injustice. But the injustice continues each hour of the day for their whole lives, and their daydreams are logical nightmares. So we need to solve this problem immediately, both in these studies and because it is ruinous to the soul and the well-being of society. People are all aware of the injustice of prejudgment when they feel its effects against their own interest. But who at that point seeks to take the log out of their own eye? There is only one way to fix this problem, as we will get into. In this study, there are many opportunities to misjudge many things, fail to consider assumptions, and make premature conclusions. It doesn't mean someone who is already believing in free energy is free from prejudgment any more than the willful skeptic seeking to disprove something. You can convince yourself it is doing something that it isn't because you want it to be the case. So this is where I'm saying to people, what I see happen is people commit to something and then they tell their family and friends. They make themselves look like a fool. And then they have to try and convince themselves that it is working, or maybe somebody else. And the worst case is when they actually get to the point of really deceitful and they start selling things to other people that don't even work. That's really bad. And I've seen it. Right here in the state, at the other end of the state, there's a guy with my name, first name, who is doing that, selling to people things that don't work. And I've seen many of them in people's basements. So what is our context? Context is an essential idea with all scientific considerations. In this subject, the rejection of free energy by the mainstream lower level scientists is largely because they are reasoning out of context by assuming the context of closed systems rather than seeing all circuits are actually open to some degree. So really this relates to spiritually, which I want to touch on, but I'll read a little bit further in the energy side here. In this case, it is often willful prejudice because they would not make that choice if a different subject that they were not familiar with came up, where they would readily think in terms of an open system. For example, if you present them with a solar panel as an analogy, they would say that it is an environmentally open system, while refusing to consider that maybe this system is also part of the same thing, in the same way, same sort of thing. So blah blah blah, I get into some examples and all that. We have to deal with sinful reasonings and find a way to make honest evaluations. The solution is not merely trying to be not prejudiced, but in getting to the core of the problem. What is our context? We first get awakened to our sense of being prejudiced by the mercy of God, by the way. Perhaps when we see others harm us while wrongfully judging us. It's instinctive to judge their actions as wrong. We cannot help it, as it involves several self-evident realizations. And my friend who may be listening, this is what I'm talking about. You know reality in the context of everyday life. When you're not even reflecting about it, it's there. It's bold-faced, in your face, and you judge everybody the same because you know the truth. But it's when you're philosophizing, like I quoted all these old philosophers who would admit to this. When I get deep into life, I realize my philosophy isn't real. is essentially what they all ended up saying. So they're fundamental hypocrites. They're writing about things that are not true, like Aldous Huxley said in Means and Ends, because we had our sexual revolution, we wanted the freedom to be promiscuous. And so we just created, he said, a philosophy of meaninglessness to suit our books. I mean, almost word for word, I was saying it there. So basically, you can find all these admissions somewhere or another, and people don't trick me anymore in all their words because they don't actually believe what they're saying when it comes down to it. And maybe they get so self-deceived that they don't even realize it. But it's in those sober moments, and that's why people don't want to be still and quiet. They always want to fill their heads with activity so that they don't think and the conscience doesn't come out and bother them. So basically, it's instinctive to judge such actions as wrong. We can't help it as it involves several self-evident realizations. We all know the golden rule is true. Do to others what you would have them do to you. So I say to you, when others do to you what would you not have them do to you, then do to them and others what you would have them do to you, because you know that you ought to do it. So let me say that again. I say to you, when others do to you what you would not have them do to you, then do to them and others what you would have them to do to you, because you know that you ought to do that. So let it be a reminder, when you seek revenge, let it remind you that there is a moral law, a moral lawgiver, and you feel the force of it right there. And that's actually the grace of God showing you reality. But when you go and create self-revenge out of the flesh, I'm not talking about obeying the law and justice and whatever. I'm talking about when you respond to the flesh with anger and hatred and returning evil from evil, you then violate the law yourself. And you know that. And many times you'll regret it because you'll do things that you'll get in trouble for. At such times that God is showing you irresistible truths. If you reject that, then no one can help you as you perish. So here we come to near end here. It is at such times that you feel helpless, even when you know you ought to. The motives are missing and there is no power to overcome returning evil for evil, or even just going on being prejudiced as you were taught to be. The truth is that you are altogether in a wrong context, like most others in this world. In this study, I want to move you from a closed context into an open context, mentally, spiritually, and also in regard to energy systems and health too. It'll be hard to get used to unless you think of analogies like solar charging being an external environmental context, while learning how to consider what is happening here, perhaps in a similar way. Far more important is the moral context of life, and that is even in your pursuit of these subjects. What is the only real method of study? What is the essential process or fact you cannot be without? Modern Western conventional science says God has nothing to do with science. So this is critical. This I'm getting into transhumanism. And if you remember anything from me in life, this is it. Like, as I lead into this. Nothing else matters. Consider what that context is. The creator of the material world and of all things has no place in scientific matters. Isn't that not the procedure and the expectation? You know, science is separate from theology. You know, religion has nothing to do with science. What is the reason? Are we not just as much in need of him to help us understand what his creation is, as when we need him to help us spiritually, for example? giving us victory over prejudice. How's that not scientific? In fact, denying that is a huge assumption that has led these people down the wrong, self-destructive road for over 150 years. Consider, everything is worse, people. Everything is worse. It has all gone to be worse. Consider again that you are always in a context that is either real or of your own imagination. Big context there. What happens in an assumed context void of God? What are your motives? Now, God has revealed himself to everyone, even if people do not want to think about it. Just as we see in the sins of others, at such times we irresistibly behold the law of God in many other things. God's moral attributes pertaining to justice, love, righteousness, and mercy are realized more or less by everyone. Let us therefore get right into this. Man, one of the most profound statements by, at that time, the greatest man that ever lived, John the Baptist. He said, man can receive nothing unless it is given from heaven. When he had just said, I must decrease and he must increase. And then said that most incredible statement. Man can receive nothing unless it is given from heaven. From him are all things. And I ask this question, what do you have that you have not received? Can you name it? What do you have that you will be able to keep? Can you name it? Those are sobering truths to think about throughout your life. All things are from God, and the study of God, theology, includes the study of all things, including all branches of science. There's nothing we can do properly without him. We cannot overcome our prejudice while separated from him. He has provided everything for life and godliness through our knowledge of him and our union with him. What context are we in? Are we in a continual state of receiving all things as from heaven? Or are we in a continual state of living as if it's not from heaven, and so contradicting that which is sent from heaven into our lives? In doing science, we must be doing all things by the leading of God, not only in doing what we know is right and proper, and not doing that which is wrong, but also being in a state, in a present experience, as being led by God. I've never really heard people say that. I might have and just not realized it. But we need to be led. Led. I'm not talking about merely obeying some scriptural injunction or some truth. I'm talking about being led. As God was leading the Israelites in the wilderness for 40 years, his physical presence was manifest. His presence, spiritual presence, was manifested physically, and he was with them and leading them. And when they proceeded without his leading, they got into trouble. In the same way, he'll trip your way up in his mercy. If you're not being tripped up and you're in your sins, you've got very little hope for yourself. You become abandoned of God. So he's made us to be this way in this present age. There's no satisfaction in life without being all that we were meant to be. Doesn't that make sense? Like, when we do science or anything in life apart from that divine life, we end up objectifying the created world and all beings and manipulate such to our own selfish advantage. We are out of the larger context in a closed, self-destructive loop, just like modern selfish circuits, as I've taught. The true science is not being merely ethical, but is being in a state completely consistent with reality and with the one who created us to relate to him and to others in all goodness and truth. We were meant to be united together in one, in perfect love. Furthermore, he made us and calls us to be led by him in all things at all times. Consider a weak analogy to this, where blind people can now be led by others. Remote sighted assistance, RSA, is an assistive technology for people with visual impairments, where remote sighted agents provide real-time navigation assistance to users with visual impairments via video chat-like communication. If a blind person was constantly having someone remotely see for them, they would be continually directed by them. But in a much more thorough way, we are led by God. Contrary to that is the modern world set up to separate science and education from such a relationship to God and others. The world has been gradually molded into a culture of deism. So the school, like I was thrown into the wolves' den, the secular school, and so here I go to church, forced to go to church as a kid, where nobody cared about me. I was the hopeless one. And then the school did the same. And so I'm supposed to be, I'm educated in a godless context. There is no God in this whole context. And I'm being trained in that. I'm being trained to be an atheist, is essentially what I was. And so naturally, what you put in is what you get out. So deism, I say deism rather than atheism, because deism is the idea that God exists, but is not active part of our lives, like the watchmaker, right? Paley's watchmaker winds it up and lets it goes, and no more dealing with it. This allows for people to retain some form of religion and yet live their lives apart from their Creator, while satisfying themselves that they are doing what is right, with the hope that one day they may experience the glories of heaven on the other side. Many religious people in this modern culture, therefore, are like deists or practical atheists, and have been fundamentally misled about religion, science, and how to live their lives. One famous example was that founding father, Thomas Jefferson, you might know that name, who made the Jefferson Bible, with all the miracles removed. There's a picture of it. He took out all the miracles out of that and just wanted the moral elements. So he was a deist and did the same thing as modern science does. My point is merely to point out that modern science is largely viewed in an atheistic or deistic context, as if God has no part in his creation, especially an active part. In other words, what the creation, including us, are in a totally closed system. There we go. It's a perfect analogy. So we're in this closed system. We're on our own. That's what they believe. That's what they teach. And that's why they miserably make this world a nightmare. So this is absurd and the height of insanity. More specifically, I want to focus on an even deeper level than merely not acknowledging God interacting presently in the material world, but in people studying his creation without being in a state of holiness and purity and walking with God, where they're experiencing Eden to some extent, while they are being filled and led by the Holy Spirit of God. So this is what I was talking about earlier, that you're not going to experience the life that you were meant to experience without being all that God offers you. And when Adam and Eve took the wrong advice and went against their Creator, our Creator, what happened to them? They were all of a sudden afraid. They felt shame. They felt all these things needlessly. And then now they were more separated from him. And that's a long story. But anyway, let's go on. So there is no doing proper science or anything else for that matter without being in such relations and proximity with God, or to God, or in God. Ironically, I spent a year on campuses all across the country where I had beneficial debates with atheists, and were often insisted where they often insisted upon seeing God before they would believe. I say ironically, and yet God promises to do that and more, and to dwell in them if they would not block him out. So, and I didn't even say that to them. I mean, in probably a more shallow way than I would have now. Here they were asking for the very thing that God was offering them, even more. Not just to see some kind of outward action, and whoa, I believe. No, like that God can actually walk with you moment by moment. How much better is that? Oh, yes. That is what it's all about, my friends. So, as mentioned, when we all have notable experiences in our lives, are spared in some remarkable ways while we are crying out to him, or when he leads us down a path of life's lessons, and someone comes and does some kind deed for us right at the perfect time. We may feel some touch of his personal care about us. I've had many such experiences, one of which was my earliest and most notable one was when I was 16 and trying to break off with a girlfriend I was in bondage with. I kept going back to her in my weakness. She was older and manipulative, whatever. Then at the perfect moment, my father ran into the room telling me, "Get off the phone because our toilet just blew up." And he didn't know how to turn off the water as the valve was downstairs. Now, I've told this story before, but so I hung up, turned off the water, and then asked my dad how it happened. He said he wasn't even in the bathroom and didn't know. I found no evidence of something breaking it into pieces. Nothing. There was no reason for it blowing apart. And I did maintenance for years later on in life to know that that was not normal. It wasn't so much the unexplainable or unusual, but the timing. There were many things leading up to that. At that point, it made me more than wonder. It awakened me with the touch of God. I began seeking to know him. I still didn't know. I didn't know anybody who was even a real Christian, even though my family is all professing Christian. I didn't know anybody could walk with God. And after I got awakened, and there was this book that was left, and I started reading. I was like, wow, this sounds like the New Testament. This person who was only 200 years ago. And that really awakened me that I could be something totally different. And so then I started really awakening. But anyway, there were many things that led up to that and made me wonder. But it was this touch of God. That's what people are looking for. It's the power of God in our lives, people. It's like righteousness, love. All these things are the power of God in our lives. When we're weak, he is strong, the power of God in our lives. And so when God touches us, and it's unmistakable that he has reached out to us, don't look at that as needing to be a one-time in a lifetime experience. He's wanting to be that with you all day long. I'm not talking about like making miracles all day long, but you could say it's a miracle in the sense that God is dwelling in you and conversing with you like closer than any person that you could ever commune with. Then that, what do you want to call that? People don't believe that's even possible. That's for heaven. What are you talking about? You know? So I remember vividly these pivotal moments that sobered me up, where I was running from the police when I was 14 years old, and I was climbing a fence and over a barbed wire fence, and I remember, I still see it when I was running. I wasn't really worried about what was behind me. but I felt God calling. I didn't know what that meant. I was kind of uncertain. I just didn't know what to do with it. Like, what does that mean? He's calling me. I was running from him like Jonah. Yeah. But I didn't know him or what that meant. So many critical events happened to get my attention. And I thought they were working against me, but they were actually bringing me into a state to be awakened. Like the whole problem with my eyes, that I couldn't read like everybody else because I had this eye problem and not know it, which were probably induced by the mercury fillings that I used to have. But anyway, it caused me to be looked down by everyone. So then I didn't trust anybody. Then I saw through the superficiality of everybody. So all these things in a way helped me indirectly. So really, it depends on our outlook on life. We are what we think we are, so we can be self-fulfilling prophecy of self-destruction or be an instrument of God for usefulness. So there are many times and ways that God becomes real to us, whether we are atheists or whatever religion. It's not in arguments and words that we know him to be real. And that's where some of these people, in these evidence books are, not this guy particularly, but some other ones, they're missing the point, like what's called apologetics, defending the faith, as if you can do A plus B equals God. It doesn't work that way. You actually do a great disservice when you boil things down to some logical argument. Now, you always have to be logical, and that's what this book was about saying, right? But if you're not spiritual while you're logical, you're an offense to everybody. You're just not very attractive, believe me. Nobody wants somebody who's just a machine talking to them. And is your life really attractive? Like Paul said, would that you would all be like me, except for these chains, when he was in chains. So it's not arguments or words, but it's his power is demonstrated in love and judgment and mercy and rebuke. People demand a sign, and yet they have already experienced such. But we were made not to just experience a few incredible encounters with him in our lives, as I was saying, but to have it such daily, even moment by moment. That's where all the hymns say, moment by moment. And all these songs become so real. So when you read some of those songs, you realize, like, I grew up hearing these songs, but I didn't know what they meant, and nobody around me knew what they meant. They just sang them. But now I know. Now I know the living waters. If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture says, out of his belly flows rivers of living water. Now this he said of the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive. For those of you who are Christians, I've asked this question thousands of times. Would it be better if Jesus Christ was sitting and walking beside you like disciples every day? Would your life be better? And if you know what I'm talking about, then you're not going to say, well, you have to admit the truth. So, if your life would be better because Jesus is beside you, you need the Spirit of God in you still. And you need to read Romans 8, Romans 6, and you need to read chapters 14, 15, 16 of John, the Gospel of John. When we so drink of his presence, we can have continual fellowship, conscious fellowship with God in the ultimate open context that defies this unbelieving dead world. And I'm talking about the physical world. A confession, as I already said, this is where I was trying to come to this. I couldn't do this book until I could come to this place where I finally let go and embrace him for all who he is. So what I'm talking about is when people assume to be in a state experienced in heaven, as I said earlier. Non-religious people probably think that what I said about needing to have God at all in relation to science is equally absurd. But in fact, God made us to know him, not externally, but for him to actually inhabit us as he did the ancient temples. And we were to have conscious fellowship with him closer than with any people we know. This is where life becomes real and alive, is the absolute open context. From him, through him, to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. So the deistic culture we have been born into, at best, only gives some credit to God for giving us material things and maybe some spiritual things. Yet all things are from him, and that includes whatever comes in our way in life. All things are from him. All things are to be through him. This requires us to be connected to him and guided by him. But the deistic culture trains us to be led by ourselves and or the experts or popular opinion. There is very, very little place and time for doing any action through him. As for doing anything for him or to him, we see the same scarcity, which is usually but lip service. The present culture, including most of the religious variants, is therefore fundamentally misguided, deficient, and in complete opposition to the way life was meant to be. Naturally, we live in the most miserable, unloving, corrupt, and diseased times in history. We have multiplied poisons, destroyed the land, covered up with such lies, with more poisons, claiming them to be solutions, while they only make things worse. We have become obsessed with fiction and the unreal delusions because we've refused to come to him for life, the life that's worth living. So, but this will not always be the case. For at some time it will be said, this land that was desolate has become like the Garden of Eden. The cities that were once ruined, desolate, and destroyed are now rebuilt and inhabited. That's Isaiah again, 51. While Eden was taken from this world, it was also God's plan to see his original mission to spread Eden throughout the whole earth. This is what our first parents were supposed to do until they sinned. In the New Covenant times, we are able to become the temples or habitation of God, whose glory will be reversed. No, whose glory will eventually, fill the whole world as never before. So imagine not just one temple, but millions of temples around the world. What do you think is going to happen to the earth? Right? Forget your environmentalism. This is the true environmentalism. That's what I get to here. This is what our first parents were supposed to do until they sinned. So, we will become this, eventually fill the whole world as never before. As a result, and this was the plan. God always knew this was going to happen. Right? So don't think this is some colossal failure. It's all working towards the good. Even though right now it's as dark as ever, it will change because God is in control. And we need to believe it. And this is not blind faith. This is real. As a result, the curse this world is under will be proportionally reversed. We have seen small examples of this in history, like I was talking about. The only thing holding this back is a lack of expecting it and fulfilling the conditions that I'm talking about right now. So we are not just talking about how to do proper science, but how to save this world in every sense. This is true environmentalism, fundamentally. Over the last 20 years, I have been blessed to have met and corresponded with thousands of people all over the world about non-conventional alternative energy generation theory and actual utilization. Everyone is a student wanting to learn this science for the purpose of achieving energy independence and making the world a better place. In 2007, we started Renaissance Charge with a line of battery chargers that allow people to use their batteries indefinitely and also solve some of the major environmental problems of the world. We estimate over 10 million useless batteries have been brought back to usable condition. Here we can see how we can make a much better, greater difference in a fact that solves all the world's physical and spiritual problems we all have grumbled and complained about. Of utmost importance and key to achieving exactly that, or less than that, is for us to build a crystal clear foundation that was laid at the foundation of the world. When we understand the purpose for the physical world and embrace our calling in relation to creation, then we shall finally achieve the hope of the ages, that even though has long been forgotten, yet is our destiny. You will listen and never understand. You will look and never perceive. For this people's heart has grown callous. Their ears are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes. Otherwise, they may see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I will cure them. The water that I will give them will become a spring of water welling up to eternal life. And then I start the book. The technical side of things. But like I said, it's all the problems are solved of this world. And we are so crippled in fear. We are so distracted. And we have these theologies of pessimism. Oh, it's going to be times of tribulation and all this. And they're just hoping to die, is what these Christians are doing, a lot of them. And all sorts of things. I'm not going to get into the politics of anything, because it's beyond all that, people. So, bless you all, if you're still listening, and we'll see you on the next video.